In this video we are going to take a closer look at the June balanced dataslate of 10th edition, as well as the most recent version of the Munitorum field manual for Warhammer 40k, both of which were released last week. In the first part, we will go through all the relevant changes for the Deathwatch in 10th edition. In the second part, we will then look at what this potentially means and how we can best adjust our Deathwatch list to accommodate these changes. Lastly, there will be my personal conclusions and a quick wrap-up of what has been covered.
Welcome to SwissHammer, your channel for modeling in Warhammer 40k. My name is Tammer and I will be guiding you through this video.
Well guys, to put it mildly, things have not been looking good for the Deathwatch this first half of the year prior to these most recent rules releases. All but forgotten in the previous balanced dataslate and Munitorum field manual, the Deathwatch fell heavily behind both in player numbers as well as performance, and we have to keep in mind here that we have always been quite a niche faction to begin with. Anyway, the good news is that this most recent wave of updates finally has something in store for us. So what changed? Starting with the June 2024 balanced dataslate, the relevant parts here can be found on the first page, the core rules, with the following changes. First of all, rules that previously would drop the cost of a stratagem to 0, such as the Captain's Rights of Battle ability, now only reduce the cost of that stratagem by 1 CP. Furthermore, the second paragraph, stratagems that can be used more than once per phase turn also affect Rights of Battle and similar abilities, in the way that if the name of the stratagem is not specifically mentioned, the reduction by 1 CP applies, but you can no longer double use that stratagem. The wording of this one is a bit odd, but in essence, the Captain's Rights of Battle ability can now be used with all stratagems again, aka it is no longer limited to just the battle tactics types, but the reduction will only be by 1 CP, and you cannot use a stratagem that has already been used in the same phase. I think whether this is good or bad heavily depends on the detachment and available stratagems, and we will get back to this later in the video. Then furthermore, rules that affect the CP cost of your opponent, such as the Calidus Assassin's Reign of Confusion or the Watchmaster's ability, got changed to an aura ability called Lord of Deceit. This one now increases any stratagem used by your opponent on one of his units within 12 inches of the model with the Lord of Deceit by 1 CP, making this potentially very powerful against melee-oriented armies. Last and certainly not least, under the Space Marine section of the balanced dataslate, the transport capacity of the Impulsor goes up to 7 and the Repulsor goes up to 14, which is quite amazing and finally allows for easier character support alongside of a unit making use of these transports. Moving on to the core rules, which have received a huge number of updates that would go beyond the scope of this video, but I think what stands out here are the changes to moving units and devastating wounds, with the latter now basically being mortal wounds that don't spill over. We will also get back to this one later in the video. Then finally, as far as rules are concerned, the Codex Space Marines also received some updates and erratas, and I think the main part here for the Deathwatch is that unit restrictions that were formerly limited to the unique detachment only are now once again limited to the faction as a whole. This means that for Black Templars, Space Wolves and the Deathwatch, the Space Marine Chapter Army rule again prevents them from including a list of units previously locked to the corresponding detachment, aka Deathwatch cannot take scouts, devastators or tactical marines, regardless of detachment. Scouts in particular became quite popular in Deathwatch lists outside of the Black Spear Task Force, for instance for the Vanguard or the Gladius detachment, both of which work really well for the Deathwatch in the light of how GW butchered our special issue ammunition. I guess we all saw that one coming though. Moving on to the Munitorum Field Manual, the Deathwatch exclusive changes are a very much needed 10 points drop per 5 Deathwatch veterans, reverting the totally unjustified points increase from a previous release of the Munitorum Field Manual. The timing here is excellent indeed, as the new Pariah Nexus missions are back to rewarding battle line units, sort of what we had in 9th edition with troops, and with Deathwatch veterans we do of course have a very solid battle line unit to pick from. Furthermore, in the light of the vect ability changes, the Watchmaster drops by 10 points, very welcome even though I personally don't think that he got worse, and then also Watch Captain Artemis drops to a very affordable 65 points, though I think that he is still being outperformed by regular captains and or the Watchmaster. Last and certainly least, no points changes to kill teams, which is absolutely outrageous at this point. Who would possibly ever pay 180 points for a 5-man Proteus kill team over the 100 points for 5 Deathwatch veterans? It just makes no sense whatsoever, and this goes for the pricing of pretty much every other kill team, regardless of size. Just to have it said once again, the 5-man prizes have to be at the level of the 5-man version of the original datasheet, and the 10-man prizes have to scale depending on the selected models. As it currently stands, kill teams are heavily punished both in points as well as overly harsh limits to the different models that can be included. Anyway, moving on to the generic Space Marine datasheets, here we see an increase in several vehicles, including the Gladiator Reaper, Valiant, then Land Raider Redeemer, as well as the Storm Raven gunship. This is likely targeting the Iron Storm detachment, rather than having that much of a direct effect on the average Deathwatch list using our Black Spear task force anyway. On the bright side of things, the Repulsor drops in points. As mentioned very early into 10th edition, I think this one has play with some Eradicators making good use of the emergency embark ability. And let's not forget that its transport capacity increased to 14, so we can finally bring along some character support as well. My personal highlight, however, is that the Vindicator remains at its very nicely costed 175 points. I have been including 1 or 2 of these in pretty much any of my lists all over 10th edition. With the basic rules and points changes out of the way, what does this mean for the Deathwatch? Overall, I think the sum of changes are working in favor of the Deathwatch, but unfortunately it is far from enough. First of all, I think that the Rites of Battle ability change offers a solid boost to Black Spear Task Force lists, given that only 1 out of 6 stratagems qualify as battle tactics, and it's even the generic Space Marine one, Armor of Contempt. This means that now a captain can once more provide access to free teleportarium, adaptive tactics, or one of the butchered special issue ammunition stratagems. And even better, because of the rewording of the rule, the CP reduction now refers to the usage of the stratagem. It does not mention a specific unit, aka whenever you're playing a stratagem affecting 2 kill team units, a captain in at least one of them is enough to make it cost 0 CP for both units, and just as a friendly reminder, Deathwatch veterans have the kill team keyword. In the light of their points decrease, as well as the new missions, I think including 2 squads of minimum size for mission play or a 10-man blob as heavy hitters is certainly worth considering. Then furthermore, I think the Watchmaster has huge potential now with his CP cost increasing aura, even though it means that we will have to place him in the heat of things. But this is not really an issue, as I personally think he has always been quite a great tool to deliver his unit into melee anyway, no small thanks to his strategic knowledge ability, allowing advance and charge, perhaps with a 10-man unit of Deathwatch veterans as previously mentioned. On the flip side of things, the neglect shown to kill teams, both in terms of points and rules, is really bad as far as I'm concerned, and I personally find it difficult to justify the inclusion of any kill teams at this point. Both the Spectres and Forest kill teams are heavily hindered by unit limitations and the lack of good rules. The Proteus kill team is heavily overpriced, and while the Indomitor kill team can still somewhat effectively use the special issue ammunition stratagems, if we wanted to go for max synergy here, we would need 2 of them, and I just don't think they are good enough for that given the lack of melee punch. When playing the Black Spear Task Force, I think the key elements here are mission tactics, the Tomb of Ectoclades, which is an auto-include, and bringing a Watchmaster and a couple units of Deathwatch veterans for mission play. But as far as the rest is concerned, I think we are better off picking from the regular Space Marine datasheets rather than leaning into our kill teams, which is a very sad state to be in. Some things to consider here with the updated rules is that we want to bring the Watchmaster into the heat of things, which might no longer make him an ideal candidate for the Tomb of Ectoclades. A good alternative here is to place the tomb on a captain supported by company heroes, a cheap and effective unit. For anyone playing an Indomitor kill team, using the Gravis captain with the Thief of Secrets is still an excellent way to add a much needed melee punch, and we really want that captain for Rites of Battle anyway. Beyond that, as I mentioned earlier, I like to use 1 to 2 Vindicators. They are such a great tool into a variety of targets, and I always include at least 1 squad of Infiltrators, as well as some Inceptors. With the mentioned changes to repulsors, I think a repulsor, eradicators and apothecary biologist combo might be worth trying, but that's more of a general Space Marine stunt rather than something Deathwatch exclusive. Still good fun though. For anyone still willing to pay the heavy price, having a Proteus kill team supported by a Judiciar or a Watchmaster and Apothecary combo has some play, but you are going to put an awful lot of points into that. Speaking of the Judiciar, I think he could at this point also come alongside some Deathwatch veterans. All in all, YGW has been throwing us a bone through the changed Rites of Battle and Vect abilities, no doubt an unintended side effect, as well as long overdue points reductions for Deathwatch veterans and the Watchmaster. GW has failed once again to address the 2 core problems of the Deathwatch in 10th edition. The first is kill teams, which are completely overpriced and suffer from overly harsh unit limitations and poor rules, and the second are the butchered special issue ammunition stratagems, which make half of the stratagems available in the Black Spear Task Force detachment, for which we never got compensated for, even though much has changed in terms of the rules partly responsible for why special issue ammunition might have been a bit over the top at the very beginning of 10th edition, like devastating wounds for instance. While I am very well aware that Deathwatch has always been and will likely always be a niche faction, for as long as dedicated rules exist, I think expecting them to remain updated and balanced is not asking for too much. A bit of AdMech treatment would go a long way for the Deathwatch. On a final note, I would like to remain positive about playing Deathwatch, and I think that at least these changes have made playing Black Spear Task Force more attractive, and as much as I am missing good kill team rules, I think that especially for beginners, Deathwatch is currently quite accessible, offering the best looking Space Marine army with somewhat simplified rules and without the need to learn potentially difficult kill team combinations. Not necessarily what we veteran players might have wanted, but I would still give my thumbs up for any new player looking into building a Deathwatch army. And who knows, maybe one day we will get a proper rules update in 10th edition that will make kill teams competitive again. To wrap things up, over the course of the video, we have looked at the release of the June balanced dataslate and another update to the Munitorum field manual for Warhammer 40k 10th edition and what it means for the Deathwatch. All in all, this has been a huge update with a lot of changes, the biggest for 10th edition overall, and the good news is that the Deathwatch has not been completely overlooked after all. My personal highlights are the changes to Rites of Battle. We can now use it with all our Blackspear Task Force stratagems once more, and given that they all cost 1 CP only, the 1 CP reduction is all we will ever need. Furthermore, with the rewording of Rites of Battle, when targeting 2 kill team units with a stratagem, 1 captain in one of the 2 is enough to get the reduction. On the flip side of things, we can no longer double play stratagems. Furthermore, the Watchmaster now comes with a CP increasing aura ability rather than his former Vect, which I think makes him even better than he used to be before, and he now comes at a cheaper price as well, no less. Speaking of which, Deathwatch veterans finally go down by 10 points for 5, reverting the former unjustified price increase, and I think the timing here is excellent, as the new missions reward the usage of battle line units, so it's about time that we included 2 to 3 units of Deathwatch veterans once more. Speaking of including units, scouts are now banned from the Deathwatch regardless of detachment once more, not that much of a surprise to be honest. On that note, while GW may have thrown us a bone, the 2 core issues with Deathwatch remain unaddressed, the first of which are the overpriced kill teams with poor unit compositions and rules, and the second is the butchered special issue ammunition stratagems, for which we never got compensated for. GW, it is about time that Deathwatch gets some ATMEC treatment in the next balanced dataslate or a proper codex supplement. Meantime, we keep praying to the God Emperor. Hang in there, fellow members of the Watch. So that's it for the release of the June balanced dataslate and another update to the Munitorum Field Manual for Warhammer 40k 10th edition and what it means for the Deathwatch. What do you guys think about these changes, and how do you rate the Deathwatch nowadays? Any major changes you're going to do to your lists, let me know in the comments. Then finally, if you made it this far and I still have your attention, if you like my content, any additional support is greatly appreciated, as it helps me invest into future videos. For that, I have both a Ko-fi as well as a Patreon page, links are in the description. Furthermore, I would also like to mention that there is a SwissHammer Facebook page where I will be posting links to my videos as well as articles I find of interest. I do read a lot about the hobby, but not all of it will always end up as its own video. I look forward to seeing you there as well. As always, thank you very much for watching guys, your continued support is greatly appreciated. I hope you have been enjoying this video, give me a thumbs up if you did, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks again and see you next time.